Welcome everybody to the Human Happy Hour podcast. And I'm your host, Rena, with Jayson Argento. And today we're joined by a returning guest, Omkari Williams. She is a certified coach, author, and host of the podcast, Stepping into Truth, Conversations on Social Justice and How We Get Free. And she's here to discuss her new book, and it's titled Micro-Activism, How You Can Make a Difference in the World Without a Bullhorn. So glad to have you back, Omkari.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be back here. I so enjoyed our first conversation.
Yeah, it was great. You're wearing the same earrings as you are in the picture.
Oh, am I? Okay. These are sort of, I you know what? I think that these are sort of they go with everything earrings.
Yeah, they're very nice. I'm
Thank you.
pretty sure they are. Yeah, because I was doing the stuff, and so I got really intimate with, really close with everything.
I think you're right.
Thumbnail.
I think you're absolutely right that they are. And yeah.
I like
so them. Thank you.
Awesome. So first of all, I'd like to I know we talked about it last time, but could you define microactivism a little bit?
Absolutely. So what I define microactivism as is any action that you take in service of making the world better. And it doesn't have to be making the world better in an enormous way, because that is actually out of the scope of most of our capacity. But it's just about being consistent in taking action and moving the needle, really just moving the needle a tiny little bit. I'm fond of saying that there are 8 billion people on the planet, and if we each did something every day or even every week that was just an action to make the world better, we would live in a very different world than the one we currently live in. Especially, at the moment that we're talking now, it feels like the world is going to hell in a handcart really quickly. And that can be so overwhelming that people start to feel like, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do nothing. And microactivism argues, do something, do the little thing you can. Go to the food pantry and donate some food. Go to the food pantry and donate some of your time. Read to kids at the library. Start a garden, a community garden, something. It really doesn't matter what, because again, with those 8 billion people, if we all did something, we all have different interests, we'd get everything covered. So that's microactivism in a nutshell.
It sort of sounds to me, so I've heard people use this other term, mutual aid. Are they similar? Can you talk about that?
I think that microactivism supports mutual aid, and mutual aid, when I think about it, I really think about very intentionally looking at what a community needs, looking at what a collective of some sort needs, and then supplying what you can from that pool of needs. So I have friends who didn't have a car until recently. So what would happen in our friend circle here was, if someone was going out, they would take our friends without a car along with them to the grocery store, or if they needed to go to the doctor, they would run them to the doctor, or whatever they needed that they needed a car for, someone picked up the slack. And it wasn't the same person every time. So it was whoever was able to do it. And the same thing was true of, holiday meals when people didn't really have family close by and it was just too far to go. So people would get together and they would make a meal together and just enjoy each other's company. Also, during the pandemic, people who had the means would do things like supply necessities for people who were really struggling financially in that time. So that's more of a mutual aid thing, but microactivism can support that, because let's say your commitment is, I'm going to make a meal once a week and I'm going to give it to this unhoused person that I see every single day. And they know that on Tuesdays, there's going to be a dinner for them. And that gives them some structure and some stability in their life. And maybe they can then use the energy they're not using worrying about eating to help move their situation forward in another way.
Hmm.
So are you solving world hunger? No, but you're feeding one person, and does it matter to that one person? Yeah, it matters a lot.
Wow, yeah, I gotta tell you, I'm very excited that you're here, because I need this. I've become very but just with everything that's going on, I've just become like ready to just leave the country.
And go where?
I know,
Yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. It's like, and I always consider myself not a quitter, but like I've been like when I start to get to a point where I want to run, I it's kind of arrogant, I guess, but I feel like, man, there's some people out there that it must be even worse. Obviously, how I feel. Everything seems so frustrating.
Yes, that is a word that has come up a great deal in my life in the last couple of weeks. And trust me when I say you are not alone in that wanting to just run and then thinking, yes, but where would I go? Because I myself have had that internal conversation of, oh, I've got to get out of here. This is insanity. And then realizing that the whole thing is insanity. There's nowhere to go. And also, that's just not our job. Our job is to stay and do what we can. Again, when we scale down, we make it possible to keep doing that. When we have these unrealistic expectations for ourselves is when we absolutely burn out and start feeling like I am useless, I can't make a difference in anything. And we actually wind up supporting the structures we're trying to change. So part of what microactivism allows us to do is stay engaged in a way that is sustainable for us. And that is honestly, I think the most important thing is to be realistic about what is sustainable for you, not what is sustainable for your cousin or your sister or your best friend. What is sustainable for you? Because each of us has a different point at which we have hit our wall. And rather than hit the wall, how about knowing that the wall is there and not walking into it in the first place? And microactivism allows you to scale for you, not for some idea of what you should be doing.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I guess everything, even doing the podcast is, we definitely, I think, send positive ripples into the universe.
You do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we try to be intentional with our guests, right?
Yeah.
People that have good messages or doing good work or just entertainers that make people smile.
Inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Smiling counts. I actually had a conversation with two of my neighbors who are heading off for a month in Santa Fe today. And we were talking about how just stressful planning for a long holiday or a trip can be, and anxiety producing it can be. And one of the things we talked about is that smiling and laughter are antidotes to those things, right? It's like, first off, there's almost always something funny that happens when you're planning a trip. It may not feel funny in the moment, but when you look back on it, yeah, this is pretty ridiculous, and you're going to laugh. So there's always something. And there's something about laughter that just reconnects us to our humanity in a different way, because it's so natural. It's not something that we thought about, oh, I think I'll laugh here. No, we just laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a release, and we need that. We're in a bit of a pressure cooker right now. And having avenues for release. I mean, there are times I just sit down and turn on British television and watch absolutely silly things just because my brain needs a little bit of a break from the seriousness and from the reality. And then I can come back and I'm refreshed and I am able to participate in a more full way. And I think we all need that. And I think it's really challenging when we live in a society that is constantly telling us to be productive. It's like, how productive were you today? I don't know. I sat on my couch and I didn't hurt anybody or myself. Is that good enough?
Yeah.
Some days, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been I've been writing a lot as a freelance writer, and the topics that come up are usually what people are Googling. And so they're getting just tons of mental health topics. And I end up diving in, doing all this research, and I just keep going back to like, people need leisure time. They need, like,
Yes.
in this country, it would be huge for mental health. And like, people need access to whole foods that they can, like, whole, good, real foods, not ultra processed foods. They need leisure time to be able to commune with others, like whether it's neighbors, family, whoever it is. And I think like we don't have that because everybody's working 2-3 jobs, everything, just to get a roof over your head. And you see the huge decline in mental health that even that has.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, and even just, you just need time off. I read an article recently about the concept of Sabbath, and not from a religious perspective, but just from a perspective of a day off. And I remember as a small child that Sundays, basically things were still closed, right? When I was a little kid, things were closed on Sundays. So Sunday was kind of a day off. I mean, yes, there were some people who worked, but it wasn't the majority of people. And stores weren't open for the most part. So if you didn't have it on Saturday evening, you didn't have it till Monday morning. And you just toughed it out, right?
Yeah.
And sure, it's more convenient now, but it's also more stressful now. There was something about the pace of a Sunday when you didn't have the option of going to the store and wandering around the mall, when you didn't have the option of going to the grocery store even, you know? I mean, I grew up in Manhattan, so the local bodega might have been open, but, you know, the big stores were closed. And it was a very different dynamic. And it's not like Manhattan was ever a quiet paced place, but it was quieter. And there was a more intentional experience of it. And I think there was also something about just knowing that you shared that day off with the majority of people that was inherently restorative. It just took the option away. It's like, nope, everybody's off today. It'll have to wait till Monday. And we were fine. We were fine. Now it's convenient, but I don't think we're as mentally well equipped as we were then. And I'm not saying that from the perspective of, oh, the good old days. I'm really saying it from the perspective of, we need rest, and we have created a society where that is the dearest commodity that we have.
And it's frowned upon.
Oh, yeah.
You're considered lazy if you have one job. like you have one job and you complain.
Right.
Oh, well,
or if you have that one job, you should at least be working 60 hours a week, right?
Yeah, it's insane. It's just, and I tried.
It's unsustainable.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And even if you're tough enough to do it, you're hurting yourself and people around you, and you don't even know it. And you wouldn't know it until you had the time off and could allow yourself to accept that time off.
Right. And I think that part of the challenge, I had interviewed a woman on my podcast. Her name is Kat Calvin, and she wrote this book, American Identity in Crisis. And it's about 26 million Americans who don't have ID, and how impossible it is to live in this country without identification. I mean, you can't get a bank account, you can't get a home, you can't go to school, you can't even go to a lot of food banks without ID, or shelters without ID. So it's a really terrible problem. But one of the things that Kat brought up was, there's a whole generation of people who don't remember what it was like to live in a country where ID was easy to get, and where the things that come with ID were much more accessible. So anyone who was not conscious or born before September 11th does not understand how dramatically that changed the country, and how dramatically that change also impacted our understanding of rest. right? That the anxiety that was produced and the sort of the war footing that we were on really sort of compressed everything. And we've never decompressed from that way of being in the world, from feeling sort of constantly on the edge of being under assault and constantly like we need to be doing something to produce something and protect ourselves and make our country safer. And, you know, so people bought more guns and people bought, you know, which has not made the country safer. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact. And I think it's really important to look at the intersections of things and notice them. But it's so hard when either you weren't born before that thing was the case. I mean, Kat and I were laughing about how you used to be able to walk into the airport and your family could walk to the gate with you and hang out till your plane left.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as the TSA. You kept your shoes on. I mean, there's a whole generation that would look at you like, what are you even talking about? If I said that, they'd be that, you know, the Stone Age. Well, not really.
Yeah.
We're talking about less than 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole shift, all of these things, I think, connect up in a way of, if we're constantly on guard, if we're constantly producing, if we're constantly looking outward, then the opportunity to rest does not present itself. The opportunity to reflect does not present itself. And I'm not sure that that is not an intentional thing.
Yeah. I'm just curious, what's the reason, or what are some of the reasons why someone wouldn't have an ID? Like, that's a lot of people.
Okay, so remember a couple of weeks ago, we had those serious floods in New York City, in Brooklyn. I don't know if you saw the pictures of like feet of water just on the streets.
In Vermont too, actually.
And in Vermont, right.
Yeah.
So I used to live in a brownstone in Brooklyn. I lived on the 3rd floor, but I had friends in the garden apartment, which is just below street level. Their homes were flooded. So if they had their birth certificate in a box, they're gone.
Yeah.
Gone. Their social security card, gone. You can't laminate your social security card.
Yeah.
And Kat and I were laughing because she's like, yeah, you get your birth certificate and you get your social security card. And I'm like, no, you don't get those. Your parents get those.
Yeah.
So if your parents aren't organized, you are completely out of luck.
Oh, funny story. My father lost mine actually, because I needed to get a new license like out here. And yeah, my father lost mine. What do you mean you lost my birth certificate?
Yep. So I mean, it's just a piece of paper. It's not that hard to lose. So there are tons of people who don't have that because it just got lost in the shuffle, or because some people are old enough that they never had a birth certificate, especially if they were born in the Deep South and they were Black. They may never have had a birth certificate. If you were incarcerated, it's very likely that either your belongings were tossed by the police when they tossed you into jail, or you've been there long enough that your ID has expired. How are you supposed to, I mean, you have to, and after September 11th, the required documentation to get ID expanded. You needed more pieces of documentation. And, I'm lucky. I know where my birth certificate is. I know where my social security card is, but only because I stumbled over the birth certificate when looking for other things, because otherwise I'd have been like, I don't know what that is. But, without that, good luck. And you can't even get into a federal building without ID. So the places that you get ID are places that are inaccessible without an ID. So it's just this whole circle.
My ex-wife needed to get her license renewed. And she's from Florida, and she didn't have her birth certificate. So I was helping her try to get it. So I called down to where she is from, and they said she had to come in person.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
we have to travel to Florida to get.
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
And it didn't used to be like that. You know, if you had an ID, if you had, when I moved to California, I didn't have a driver's license because I grew up in Manhattan. So who needed a driver's license? But I had other ID and I was able to get a license. But when I moved back to, when I moved from California to New York after September 11th, then I needed to show up with not only my California license, but my birth certificate, my social security card.
Yeah.
And each state is different because they get to make their own rules. So you don't even know consistently from one state to another.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of people who are impacted by that. And it doesn't just impact those 26 million people, it impacts the whole circle of people around them.
Yeah, it's true.
So CAT's organization helps people get IDs, and I love it because to me that's microactivism at its best, because they literally are working one person at a time. I mean, there's also a C4 arm of her organization that's trying to change policy to make it easier to get ID. But in the meantime, they're just working one person at a time. And sometimes it's a few hours, sometimes it's a few months of persistent work to try and get someone an ID so that they can actually be a citizen in this country. I mean, you're basically invisible without it.
Yeah. Wow. I never really thought about it.
Think of that stimulus check you got during COVID. Good luck cashing that without ID. So you're literally walking around with money in your pocket and it's useless to you.
Right. Oh God. Yeah. I wonder how many of those are not cashed.
Probably quite a lot.
Wow.
Yeah. And that money would be life-changing for a lot of those people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Jeez.
You know, it would be food. It would be a roof over their head. It would, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was 18, we used to go up to Montreal from Vermont, no problem. Now in Vermont, you need the upgraded license to go.
The real ID.
Yeah.
As opposed to the fake ID.
Yeah. Like,
it's just like, yeah. It's complicated.
Freedom.
And most people don't think about it because it doesn't directly impact them.
Yeah.
But it impacts us through our taxes because these are people who can't get jobs. So we are trying to sustain them through our taxes as opposed to them being able to contribute to the tax base.
Right. Wow. We had an interesting question that came up and we were waiting for someone that was into, an activist. And to answer, what do you think is too far when it comes to being an activist? Like, what is the, like, some people become violent. Obviously.
Yeah, no, that's too far.
Yeah. What is too far? Like, is that the line, or is there something before? Or because sometimes there's the argument that peaceful doesn't work because you just get ignored. So what makes it more effective?
First off, peaceful does work, and you can look at Gandhi and Indian independence. Peaceful worked. I think people think, people who resort to violence think, oh, it's the only thing that works. It definitely gets people's attention quicker, but it is not a long-term solution to anything, in my opinion. I mean, what's happening right now in Israel and Palestine I have not seen the images. I will not look at the images. I don't need that in my head. But it is so abhorrent to me that people cannot just live with peace and in dignity, just lives of dignity is all anyone really wants. And that is true across the board. And I don't feel like there should be a question about that. Terrorist organizations, I don't even really know where to start with that, because I don't understand the mentality that would allow someone to think that this was the way to go, that this was going to be the thing that got them whatever it is that they want. And I don't understand why we, the quote unquote civilized world, have not been able to figure out how to avoid getting into this situation again and again and again and again. And, you know, I just think we've been doing this, especially in the Middle East, for generations. Is this what we want to keep doing? Is this the legacy we want to be passing down to the children that are coming next? Is this legacy of fear and violence, and then, you know, a sort of not peace, but just a lack of direct conflict, but then the fear and the violence are always right there in the background. And that just, to me, is heartbreaking. So I definitely think that that is too far by about 1,000,000 miles. Basically, I mean, it comes down, it sounds so corny, but it comes down to the old do unto others. It's like, if you don't want someone doing that to you, then don't do that.
Yeah.
Do not do that. That makes it kind of simple in my world. It's like, don't do that to someone. If you don't want them doing that to you or your family, don't do it to them or their family.
Yeah.
And I also just really wish that it didn't feel like such a mine is bigger than yours kind of conflict in some way, you know, that everyone's trying to posture and position themselves as the toughest. Is that the goal? Is toughness the goal? Or is justice and peace the goal? What are the goals here? And you will never get to peace through the violence of Hamas, ever. That will never happen, because it's just not the way humans are wired. And yeah, so that's what I think about that. I mean, I really despair of that. I really do. We seem incapable of finding our way forward here.
I mean, I think there's a journalist that I follow, Chris Hedges, and he wrote a great Substack on Israel-Palestine conflict, and, you know, not to ever condone acts of terror, but in some cases you can see why we got to this place.
Oh, I see how we got here.
Yeah, and so he said, the way he phrases it, which I think is pretty accurate, is he's saying that Palestine is speaking the language of violence that Israel taught them. And so when you feel like, when you've been violently oppressed for so long and you've had nothing done onto you, and you feel like there's no other avenue, there isn't an avenue for a peace talk, or there isn't a way to escape, or there isn't a way to get my needs met, then you feel like my back is up against the wall, and the only avenue I have to speak for myself and to advocate for myself is violence. And I think that's when you get, you know, not condoning that or saying that that was the right thing, but it makes sense that that would have been the outcome because there were no other interventions, there were no other avenues, you know, for people.
That I look at this as a predictable outcome.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And a deplorable lack of humanity. I mean, there are things, you know, people have done things to me and I have wanted to lash out, but I don't, because that's against my values as a human. It's like, okay, just because you were absolutely terrible to me, I am going to suck it up, and I am not going to do that back, because I do not want to engage in that cycle of retribution and violence, because it gets us nowhere. And so I understand what you're saying, Rena. I want us to find a path out of this. And I don't want it to be 50 years from now. I don't want it to be that, you know, I mean, I'm so worried about the Palestinians who are trying to get out of Gaza right now. I am so terrified for
and
them.
they can't.
And they can't. It's like, at the very least, open up a humanitarian corridor and let people get out. Let people leave. These are innocent people, men, women, and children who have nothing to do with what is going on now.
Many
so I'm
children.
very concerned.
Many
Yeah.
children.
Many children. And, and I also think that we, especially here in the United States, we're not very well educated on the nuances of this subject.
Okay.
And so people get on social media and they have a lot of hot takes. And I understand that impulse, but we don't, most of us, and when I say most, I mean like 99.9% of us do not know enough about this to speak intelligently about it. I barely feel like I can intelligently speak about it. The history is so complicated and so nuanced. But I know what I feel on the moral side of this, which is there are innocent people on both sides of this, and they are not the ones who should be in the middle of this death and destruction. And that's just unacceptable to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, being raised Jewish and like steeped in that community, and I have friends and things, so you go on social media, and what has been most distressing to me is to see people acknowledging violence against one side, but not acknowledging the violence against the other side. So the inhumanity of the way that Palestinians are talked about, or the way that Gaza Strip, and I'm like, yes, two things can be true at the same time, that anti-Semitism is real, but also genocide against another population is not the answer. Like, this is not in our value system. And it's very distressing to me to see things that are just like, I stand with Israel and they can defend themselves. And I'm like, no, we need to find a solution that doesn't involve murder on both sides. Like, this is where I stand, is like, we need to, and it's probably going to be something that neither side is completely happy with, because that's how you have to compromise.
That's life, I mean, it's like, why are people expecting that the solution to this is going to be different than life, where you never get everything you want, ever? This is just not how it works. It is the very nature of compromise. That's why it is called compromise, because no one gets everything they want. But everyone should have the bare minimum of a home that they can live in, and peace, and reasonable security that is not about constantly being on guard for the next bomb attack or the next threat from some off the chain terrorist group that thinks that this is going to solve the problem or attain whatever goal it is they have. I don't even know really what Hamas wants. Really, whatever they say, I take with a grain of salt. But I see what the impact of what they're doing is. And the people who are ultimately really going to suffer here are the Palestinians. So when Hamas says that they're doing this in service of the people of Palestine, I'm like, really, are you? Because that's not how it looks right now from what I know.
Yeah.
But I mean, also the greater international community, nobody was speaking for the people of Palestine that have been terribly oppressed. So I think the rest of the world, and especially the Western world, has a lot to answer for in terms of letting it get to this point and oppressing these people for so long to this level, and which then creates these terror groups. When it just creates a recipe for that.
I think that anytime we try and reduce really complicated problems to really simple things, that we fall into that trap of not actually paying attention where we should be paying attention. And, that I think is part of what's happening here, is we're trying to reduce a very complicated problem to a very simple set of words. And it's not like that. It is not like that. And it doesn't serve, well, it serves someone, but it doesn't serve the majority of people on either side.
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with how many people are involved also. Like if you sometimes if you scale things down, they become clearer. Like if
Yeah.
I had a roommate and he came in and said, some guy just shot my dog. And I was like, oh my God, that's terrible. And then he grabbed a gun, I would stop him. But if you blow that up to countries, suddenly it becomes, there's no human to it. It's like, yeah, blow them up. But wait, you're not, that, first of all, that's wrong. It's also against your religion, just so you know. But but all that's going to do is it should get you in trouble, you know. But it's like the bigger country, the country with the most power, has the world community on its side, no matter what, it seems. And I really think it's up to, if you're really an ally, you should be considered a friend, and a friend should be able to check you. Like, whoa,
Yeah.
you're doing it wrong. But then there's the whole thing about, you know, Israel. You know, no politician wants to go against Israel.
Third rail of American politics.
Yeah.
But also what we're talking about, right? We were saying all these people, right? But think about it, the civilians on either side probably don't have a voice in any, like
Yeah.
No.
yeah, they don't at all. So it's like,
No.
it's these leaders, and like, and Netanyahu is a, you know, right-wing Zionist nut. So it's like civilians on both sides are you know, suffering from the actions.
They're just the pawns in this game that is being played by people in positions of power. I mean, it's, you know, the ordinary Israeli, the ordinary Palestinian has nothing to do with any of this. Nothing at all to do with any of this. And I think that, you know, it's the same when you look at the situation in Sudan, or you look at the situation in Haiti. The ordinary Haitian, the ordinary Sudanese has nothing to do with the power dynamics that are throwing their countries into chaos and forcing people to either flee their countries or be too afraid to leave their homes. You know, it's a relatively small percentage of people who are not even relatively, it's a tiny percentage of people who are the decision makers, but their decisions are reverberating out around the lives of millions and millions of people. And I think that part of microactivism is actually to start really being more critical in our thinking about how we hold our decision makers to account, so that decisions are actually being made that are reflective of our values as a whole, not reflective of just thin slivers of people who have a stake in it that we're not even aware of, you know. And it's often a financial stake in it, in these conflicts, and we shouldn't be letting that be the determinant for how we behave. We should be behaving from a moral standpoint, from saying, no, this is what I know to be right, this is what I know to be wrong, and I'm going to stand up for right and stand against wrong, no matter what.
Yep.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I guess maybe you have some advice on how to engage with people sometimes, because I feel like in this country, like we're saying, we know it's the leaders in these situations that are playing, that have other agendas that sometimes we're not even aware of. But when you try to have a conversation, and even, you know, sometimes I'll try to have a conversation with people of like, yes, terrorist organization bombing is terrible. You don't want to see people die. Like, you never want that. But at the same time, you can't cheer on other people being slaughtered. And it seems like there's some barrier to people understanding that. And so how do you get through it? And people will say, oh, but you know, you got to stand with Israel no matter what. And and it's like, but this is not the way, right? Like, this is not the thing to do. And you have to acknowledge that slaughtering another population is not the way to go. And with some people, it's like, you just can't get through. Do you have any advice on how to speak?
I have learned from being a really stubborn little cuss when I was younger that there is no such thing as changing anyone's mind. We all change our own minds. And so the way I now engage with people who have points of view that I really differ from is I get curious. And I mean, my favorite 3 words are honestly, tell me more. And I make myself listen as honestly and openly as I possibly can. Tell me more about why you think that. Tell me more. Because sometimes people don't even realize that that's not exactly what they think, or they have a reason that once you understand that, you may not agree with it, but you understand how they got to where they are. And you stop judging in the same way. Because, you know, when we're sitting in our particular posture of whatever it is, we can be really judgmental. And how is that helpful? So tell me more. And sometimes I do not like what I'm hearing. And I will say, you know, I hear what you're saying and I understand how you got to that point of view. Here's where I'm coming from, and here's why I think that this is harmful or whatever it might be. But I start with tell me more, because honestly, it's just the least we can do in terms of being respectful is really hear someone out on what they think and why they think that way. Unless they're, you know, I mean, there are obviously lines where you go, no, I'm not listening to that because it's just abuse. But when someone is genuinely talking to you about why they feel the way they do about something, I think tell me more is a completely legitimate way to engage in a conversation with someone with whom you may have extreme differences without it devolving into just a shouting match.
Yeah, that's a great point. And maybe if you've listened to them, they might, even though you're not going to change their mind, they might be at least willing to listen. And I think that was more of what I was getting at, not knowing I wouldn't change anybody's mind, but just getting them to listen, to open the door and say, but have you considered that? Like,
you have
I'd
to
like
listen
you to...
first.
Yeah. Okay.
We have to listen first. Because if we don't listen first, they're the whole time, all they're going to be doing is arguing with us in their head. And if we go into it with an honest, tell me more attitude, then we are actually willing to listen. We are actually willing to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, it's amazing how much psychology and communication is touched on in acting. Because like one of the things my acting coach used to always say, if you're not breathing, you're not listening. You're waiting for your next line. So you have to actually listen. And that works in conversations too. If someone's talking to you, check your breathing. Are you breathing or are you waiting to talk?
Yeah.
And that helps you connect more and makes and they can tell that you want to know what they're saying, because people can tell when you're just waiting to talk.
Completely. And there's something so both offensive and hurtful about that.
Yeah.
Because you're sort of denying their humanity when you do that, you know, as opposed to saying, okay, you know, we might disagree on this, but I'm willing to hear you out. And it's funny that you should mention that as an acting technique, Jayson, because in my acting days, yeah, that was so true. It's if you're not breathing, you're just waiting for your cue.
Yeah.
And your performance is going to suffer because
Sure
you're
is.
not actually responding to what's happening in the moment.
Yep.
And
I didn't know that about acting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's for sure a truism. And I think it's really important in life. I mean, acting is just life on a stage. So
yeah. Well, we don't have a lot of time left, and I want to get to your book.
cool.
As usual, we don't spend enough time with you. An hour's just not enough for me. So tell us about it and tell us about what inspired you.
What inspired me was actually someone asking me if I'd be interested in writing this book. And it wasn't on my radar, truthfully. And I had thought, oh, okay. And so I got back in touch with this woman who wound up being my editor, Liz Bevilacqua at Story Publishing. And she had just sent me an email saying, you know, I've been paying attention to your work for a while, and I'm interested in whether you want to write a book about it. And that was, I think, in February of 2020. What year is this? Yeah, 2022. And I said to her, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Send me all of the instructions for how you write a book proposal, and I will get it back to you by August, because my birthday is in August, and I wanted to give myself a concrete deadline because I was afraid otherwise it would just sort of go to the pile of things that I said I was going to do someday. And then about 2 weeks after we spoke, I thought, let me just make some notes about this so that I have an idea and I'm not letting things slip away. And I sat down and I started making notes. And a week later, I had the proposal. It was just right there. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And when I look back on it, I realized this is what I've been talking about for years. I wasn't writing a book of fiction. I didn't have to make anything up. I was basically just telling people in a book what I tell people every day in my work life. And so I sent it on, and after an excruciatingly long process, they said, yeah, we'd love to publish your book, and we'd love to publish it in 2024. And I had my agent communicate with them that I was really more interested in it being published in 2023 because I wanted it out ahead of the election cycle. Mm-hmm. I wanted people doing things before it gets so wacky. Mm-hmm. And they came back and they said, sure, if you can finish it in 3 months. And I was like, okay. Wow. And so I sat myself down in my chair at my desk 5 days a week, 9 o'clock every morning. I was in that chair and I wrote, and I had to write for at least 3 hours a day. And then I would take a break and decide if I was going to do more or not. But I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And again, because it's what I've been talking about for so long, I didn't have to excavate it from the depths of my imagination or anything. It was there. And I also was able to include some stories of people I know who are activists in their own varying ways. And that was such a joy because they do such different things and they're all very different people. And just being able to show people, it doesn't have to look like anything you've ever even heard of. It can just be your way of making a contribution. So it's been a wild year. I knew nothing about the publishing industry. I now know slightly less than nothing, but it's been so much fun, and I'm really looking forward to getting out on the road and actually meeting some of the people that I've been engaging with over the years. So it's pretty exciting.
Are you coming to Los Angeles?
I'm not.
Oh, I was gonna say maybe I'll see you.
I know I'm not. Portland is my only West Coast stop. So, but I'm hoping that maybe Vermont? I get to. I'm actually not coming to Vermont, which is probably about, the Vermont border is only about half an hour from where I live. So that's pretty funny. So, I think it's more likely that I'll get to Vermont at some point pretty soon than to Los Angeles, but I'm hoping to get to LA at some point, maybe next year.
And what's your tour like across the country? You're going from?
I start in Boston. I'm going to be at the Harvard bookstore on publication day, which is October 24th. And it's the closest I'm ever getting to Harvard. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then I go to New York and Atlanta and Brunswick, Georgia, which is was the home of Ahmaud Arbery. And I get to meet with a lot of the local activists there. And I'm really looking forward to that. And that's going to be a very youth-centered, focused event. And, I basically think it's the kids who are going to save us. So I'm really happy to be able to talk to them. And then I go to Savannah. I'm doing 2 events in Savannah. One is an educators conference for pre-K through 12th grade educators. and then a regular book event. And then I go to Louisville, Kentucky, and I get to speak at the oldest Black church in Louisville, St. Stephen's, in connection with a tiny little HBCU called Simmons College of Kentucky. And Simmons College of Kentucky has a connection to Ida B. Wells, because the founder of Simmons College inspired Ida B. Wells to go into journalism. So I'm excited
that's wonderful.
I know, it's cool, right? Then I go to Chicago, then I go to Portland, then I come home, I have a couple of events in the Northeast, and then I lie down and go to sleep for a week.
So the name
It
of the
sounds
book?
like a wonderful tour.
Yeah, that sounds fun. It's
I think it's going to be really great. And I mean, a lot of travel in a relatively short time.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be great. And I'm just also seriously, I know this is very selfish of me, so glad that the government shutdown did not happen yet, because that just messes up air travel so badly. And it's just like, I do not have a lot of margin here for delays. So I'm just grateful for, in a selfish way, that at least I get to be back home before all of that goes down.
So where can people order your book now? Where can
people can order the book now from any bookseller? It's available for pre-order now, and then it'll
There's
be
a link in the description.
A week from Tuesday. So
yeah, the 24th of October.
Yeah, I mean, how is it even October already? I need someone to explain to me what happened to August and September.
I know, yeah, they flew.
Yeah.
And it's called Microactivism: How You Can Make a Difference in the World Without a Bullhorn.
Yes.
Which is kind of what we talked about the whole time, actually.
Yeah.
Well, I think that people hear activist and they have a picture in their head.
Yeah.
And it's a legitimate picture, but it's by no means the whole scope of things. And I think it's really important that we expand our idea of what activism means and what activism looks like, so that it includes, normal humans without whom nothing would change.
Yeah. Also, you can do neat things like this. One of my friends is a teacher, and she moved to the South. And basically she used to do activism all the time. She'd go to Washington. She used to beat the drums to try to calm the crowd. She's been pepper sprayed. All that stuff has happened. But she said, it's not working. I'm going to go and talk to the children. And so she became a teacher and moved to the South, and puts a little bee in your bonnet kind of thing to the kids that are learning to be, I guess I don't know what to say, what they're learning to be, but
they're learning to be change makers. That's what they're learning to be. She's planting seeds of change.
Yeah.
And that is everything. Because it's when we get stuck that we're in trouble, and we're kind of stuck right now.
Yeah.
And so those people who are out there working with kids and pushing back against book bans, which are just like, are you even serious? And do you not understand any history and what that portends? So those people matter so much. I mean, teachers, A, they're not paid enough, B, they're not appreciated enough. And honestly, C, we should be down on our knees every day thanking God for teachers, because they make such a huge difference. I mean, I still have teachers that I remember, 1, negatively, and 4, really were so inspirational in my life. But I remember them so vividly all these years later. So that's how much of an impact teachers have.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
What are some links you'd like us to mention?
Definitely link to the events page on my website, omkariwilliams.com/events,
I'll put that in there,
because that tells you where I'm going to be. And if you can come and see me, that would be fantastic. Also, I really would like people to, A, buy the book. Definitely buy Microactivism: How You Can Make a Difference in the World Without a Bullhorn. It's in paperback. It's really beautifully illustrated, which I can say because I did not do any of the illustrations. And it's I think of it as a great holiday gift, because the thing I hear most often when I talk to people is, I really want to do something. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it. And this answers those questions.
Oh, that's great.
So I really encourage people to buy it and share it. And you can find links to that on my website as well. There's a book page. But mostly what I hope people will do, because I have exciting stuff that's going to happen in January. I need time after I get back to sort of finish doing some of the detail work. But I really want to start engaging people in community. So I want to create a space where we can interact with each other more directly. So it might be, I'm not exactly sure which platform it's going to be on. It might be on Patreon. So for, a few bucks a month, you have a community where you can really look at what's happening in various arenas of microactivism. And my fantasy is to separate it out. Not that people can't cross-pollinate, but to have places for sort of main categories like racial justice and environmentalism, where you can meet other people who are not necessarily in physical proximity to you, and just have conversations about your successes and your challenges and your dreams and how you envision making a change in the world. Because I think that often, I live in a small town. If you live in a small town, it can be a little harder to find people who are interested in what you're interested in. So I want to create a space where microactivism is kind of celebrated, and no one's expecting you to go out and fix everything, but they are going to cheer you on when you make a little tiny difference in the world.
Rena, do
I
you know
love
what I'm
that.
thinking?
I'd love to be a fly on the wall there when you get that together. But I mean, even like thinking about what you said about a small town, even like living in a big city, it's hard, very hard to connect to people and to find people that share your values or want to do something. So it's not just a small town issue. And I found like Jayson and I have never met in person, right? Like, so we met initially through an organization where, we were doing work because we had shared values. And I was thinking about how many people that I've met just in these online spaces trying to do this kind of work. And it's interesting. There are some deeper connections and people that I never would have met, and people I still haven't met in person. So I love that you're doing something like that.
Yeah, I just feel like when I started thinking about all the people I have quote unquote worked with that I've never met, I thought, I need to do something so that we have a gathering space, especially in the 21st century, especially post-COVID, when loneliness and isolation are such problems. It's like, how do we bridge that? How can we make a little bit of a difference in that? And so that's what I'm trying to do. And I wish I were tech savvier, but I'm going to figure. I'm sorry?
I have an answer for you. It's called Discord. Everything you just said, you can do in Discord.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
I will have to check that out.
All the categories, and you can video chat with whoever you want. You can have chat rooms where people all go into a voice and they're all there, and you can have a moderator. You can do everything in everything you said, Discord. And I can help you too if you need anything.
I will be, Jayson, you are going to be sorry that you made the offer.
I mean,
and that it was out there in the public, because I'm taking you up on it.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I'm going to definitely do while I'm out on the tour is I'm going to collect as many stories of people as I can of what they're doing, and then start sharing them as inspiration. But also I want to give a shout out to people who are doing the work and don't get really much attention for it, but we should be all grateful to all of them. We should be grateful to all of us. We're struggling and we're persisting. And I think that's so important. And I think, people talk a lot about self-care and so on and so forth. But for me, the true meaning of self-care is about building resilience. That is ultimately what it's about. And I am as fond of a mani-pedi as any person on the planet, but that is not self-care. Self-care is the stuff that keeps me in the game.
Yeah.
And so I really want to celebrate the people who are doing the work and taking care of themselves and being able to be resilient and keep showing up even when there's no one saying thank you. I want them to know that there are people saying thank you. They may not just live down the street, but there are people saying thank you.
That's great. I'm excited to do that. I'll send you our Discord links as a start so we can so you can look at it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're after the hour, so although I could talk to you all day, we're going to go.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. It's always so refreshing to have these conversations with you and just to remind ourselves that you do have to kind of pick yourself up and go, okay, what are some small things that I can be doing in my community or in just to move things forward in a better way. And I think a lot of times when we're inundated with the news cycle and everything seems so big and out of control and inaccessible, that you forget, like what you're saying, that there are small things that we can do in our day-to-day lives to make things better.
I just want to say that something I really do practice on a regular basis is when it starts to get overwhelming, I stop listening to the news. I just will take a little news break because first off, there's no way that something really important is going to escape my notice. There's no way. Someone will bring it to my attention and I will be able to go and look for the information that I need. But there is such a thing as overload. And there is such a thing as also, don't get your news on social media. Do not do that. Just don't do that. Find reputable sources, especially now in the era of AI, where it's really hard to know what's real. Do not get your news on social media. You're just setting yourself up for being emotionally battered. It's not the place.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it's really important that we are discerning and that we pay attention to who we're listening to. We don't just say, oh, I read it somewhere, so it's true. That used to be the case, more or less. It's not the case anymore. People have agendas that they're pushing hard, and we need to be aware of that. So I really do encourage people to know what their capacity is, take a break when they need to take a break, and be very discerning about your news sources. Thank you both so much for having me again. It was really, really great to talk with you, and thank you for the deep and meaningful conversation. I appreciate it.